Good evening, welcome everybody. It's Yom HaShoah today, so welcome to our edition of the AJA Zoom events. Welcome to our regulars, and if you're a new person joining us this week, then welcome to you also. We also like to welcome those watching on Facebook, and to anybody listening to the audio replay, which is broadcast every Thursday at midday and Sundays at 4 p.m. on J-Air Community Radio. That's at FM 88 in Melbourne, or elsewhere it's j-air.com.au. My name is Alan Friedman. I'm Vice President of the Australian Jewish Association, and you will also have seen David Adler, who's President of the AJA, on your screens also. Our guest tonight is Eddy Boas, a child Holocaust survivor, and because today is Holocaust Remembrance Day, we're going to hear Eddy's story, which will take about 30 minutes, and then we'll have questions. If you're not familiar with our format, the way to indicate that you want to ask a question is to raise your hand electronically. And to do that, you click on the reactions icon at the bottom of the screen, and then you'll see a little button to push, and that sends a signal to us, and we put you in the queue to ask questions. Written questions can be placed on the chat function, and Robert Gregory, our Director of Public Affairs, will read some of them out during question time. Okay, so as the years roll on and the Holocaust becomes more of a historical event rather than something that directly affected individual families of a large number of Jewish Australians, there is a concern that this chapter of Jewish history may fade somewhat into significance. Of course, to keep the memory alive, every year we have Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day, with multiple ceremonies around the country, and this year is no different. As it happens, Yom HaShoah is actually today, and the AJA is doing its bit by inviting Eddy Boas, a child Holocaust survivor, to tell his story and what the day means to him. 3 months and 15 days after Eddy was born in January 1940, Nazi Germany invaded Holland, and the odds of Eddy surviving have been rated as 6 million to 1. Interesting figure. The first 5 years of his life were extremely difficult in German-occupied Holland. That was followed by months in a Dutch transit camp for Jews, and then a year in Bergen-Belsen. Eddy survived and made a new life for himself in Australia, and he is the author of a book that is powerfully titled, "I Am Not a Victim, I Am a Survivor." He is active in Holocaust education, and to mark Yom HaShoah today and tell us his story, we are honoured to have him join us tonight. Eddy, thank you for doing your bit to educate people about this most horrible chapter in Jewish history, and thank you very much for your time tonight.
Thank you, Alan.
Okay, so Eddy, I'll ask you to do screen sharing, and you can start the story going as you wish.
Okay. I'll just go back to this. Okay, my name is Eddy Boas. I was born Elias Boas, but nobody ever called me Elias. My parents always called me Eddy. When I was born, my father was mobilized beforehand in August of 1939. He was in the Dutch army, and okay, it's, there we go. It's my parents' wedding in 1934. These two are my mother's sister's children. They never returned from the war. My father was an active sportsman when he was young. He was in the cavalry of the Dutch army, and this is going to become an important part of my life, horses. This is on his way to the war, where they actually started to fight the Germans on the 10th of May 1940. This is my mother and her family, 2 brothers, not her sisters, they are her sisters. They were a happy family. Both my parents and my mother's family had lived in Holland for 200 years. So they thought of themselves as Dutch Jews. They were not religious people. My mother's side was more religious than my father's side. It's my father, his mother and sister. My father had a fruit shop in Amsterdam. When they married, they moved in here, which we lived on the second floor. Here was a simple building. My parents weren't rich. They worked hard. My father, as I said before, had a fruit shop. My mother worked for her father. He had a fruit wholesale business, and that's how my father and mother met. And as they got married in 1934, my brother was born in 1935. And as I said before, I was born on the 26th of January, 1940. Did turn out to be very fortunate when I come to Australia, because then I had a public holiday every time I had my birthday. So that was quite handy. Now, my mother had a large family. My mother had 3 sisters and 2 brothers, all perished in the war, in the Holocaust. My father had, his mother was still alive when the war broke out, and he had a sister and a brother. All 3 of them perished in the war. And in total of my immediate family, 63 were murdered in concentration camps during the Holocaust. Now, whilst we lived here, the war finished. My father wasn't here, of course, when I was born. He was mobilized in the army. The war lasted 5 days. He and other 2 soldiers stole a jeep, drove back to The Hague. He came back to our flat up here and hardly ever left the flat after he came back. Now, initially, the first year, 1940, things were fairly normal in Holland. The problem became when the Dutch bureaucracy started to cooperate with the Germans. There was a census in 1939 which showed 140,000 Jews lived in Holland, of which 20,000 were German and Polish refugees. And that left 120,000 Dutch-born Jews. The bureaucracy, the Census Bureau, gave the census list to the Germans, and the Germans knew straight away where every Jew lived in Holland. Holland is a very small country. It's not an easy place to hide in. So as 1940 went on, you got into the 1940 war, the Germans started to bring in regulations about the Jews were not allowed to go to normal school. They had to go to special school with only Jewish teachers. Jews were not allowed to go to a non-Jewish doctor, only could go to a Jewish doctor. And then it became that Jews were not allowed to go on public transport, into public parks, and, sorry, I just get here, and had to wear a Star of David. This is the list of where Jews lived in The Hague. Here it says for Jews forbidden in the park. And this is a receipt for handing in our radio. Every Dutch person had to hand in his or her radio. My mother went, and then Jews were allowed to go out shopping a couple of days a week at certain hours. The Jews had to hand in all their assets into a bank called the Lippmann Rosenthal Bank, which is specially set up for this. My parents had nothing to hand in. They had a bit of cash in their hands for those days that we were living in that flat. My grandmother had 400 guilders, which is about 800 euros, but let's keep on calling them guilders. And she also had 1,000 guilder bond with the Shell company. She handed that in, and I'll talk about that when the war is finished, what happened to that. So the police in Holland, and especially in Amsterdam, were paid to pick up Jews. There was also an organization called the Henneke Brigade, which was Dutch Nazis, which were called NSB, which stands for National Socialist Bureau. And they became pretty vicious, and they were paid 7 guilders 50 for every Jew that they handed in. This became very dangerous because they set up roadblocks on streets where people went out shopping and then picked up the Jewish people. My mother's family was picked up, there was also, they put on in Amsterdam a Jewish council. And what the Germans did was gave the Jewish council order to get so many Jews to the train onto a camp called Westerbork, which was in Eastern Holland near the German border. And the Jewish council sent out notices to the Jewish people to report, say, to the local synagogue. And a lot of them did. And because they didn't, nobody knew anything about concentration camps in those early days. Certainly gas chambers were unheard of. Now, as most Dutch people had their hand in the radio, they didn't hear much from outside of the Netherlands what was going on. So the people reported thinking that they were just be registered or something like that. My grandmother did, and all my mother's sisters and brothers and my father's sister and brother did. Never to be seen again. My grandmother was 59 when she was murdered in Sobibor. My father stayed in the flat. My mother hardly ever went out. I was 3 years old, 4 years old. And they knew that they had to come when we were going to be picked up. And one day my mother, she said, she found that my brother and I needed some winter clothing. So she took us out I was in the pram. My brother was, this was late 1942. My brother was walking next to her, and as she walks outside, she bumped into a policeman. My mother was the first woman in Holland to drive a truck, and most of the policemen got to know her through that. She was delivering fruit to all the fruit shops around Holland, and mainly Amsterdam and The Hague. And she also was the second woman in Holland to ride a motorbike. So she was fairly active. She bumped in a policeman, and he said to her, "What are you doing here, Susie?" And his name was Derek. And she said, "I'm just going to buy some warm clothing for for Boy, my brother, and Eddie." So we went to the shop, and she bought what she wanted. She had some money still left. And as we walked out, Derek is standing outside the front door. And she said, "What are you doing here, Derek?" And he said to her, "Susie," which was her name, "don't look up, don't say anything, just push the pram and hold Philip tight. But don't look up and don't talk to me." So they went along walking, and they came across a roadblock manned by Dutch Nazis. And one of the Nazis, this is my mother telling me this later in life, said to Derek, "Good catch there, Derek," young woman with 2 young children. And he didn't answer back. And he walked us back to our flat and stood outside all night till the razzia, as it was called, was over. So there were some good Dutch policemen as well. Out of the 120,000 Dutch Jews, about 10,000 fled overseas to England, and the other ones, about 7,000 or 8,000, went into hiding. That left about 107,000 Dutch Jews. I'm talking fast because I've only got half an hour, so sorry about that. And there's a lot to tell you. And these 107,000 Dutch Jews were sent to Westerbork transit camp. Of the 107,000 Dutch Jews sent to that camp, only 5,000 survived. So it's the largest per head of population death of Jewish people in Western Europe. Per head of population, more Jews died in Holland than any other Western country. In Denmark, for argument's sake, 80% of the Jewish population survived, because the Danish people did a lot better for the Jews than the Dutch people did. There was recently some controversy about the Anne Frank, where somebody wrote some book, and I'll get into that if we have time a little bit later, but I'll tell you now, where they would investigate who betrayed Anne Frank. And recently, they started this in 2016, and recently they come up with a report that a Jewish lawyer betrayed him. It caused a big uproar in Holland. I got involved in it as well and wrote some pieces on that. In my opinion, I'm saying this all along, everywhere I speak, the Dutch Jews were betrayed, either by bureaucracy the police, or their neighbors. And no government officials ever argued with me about this. I've been saying this for years. So we were picked up on the night of the 28th of September 1943. We were one of the last Jews left in Holland, in The Hague, sorry. I was 3.5 years old. The door was knocked in, the green door that you saw before, and the stairs go straight up to the second floor. Like a Dutch Nazi and a German soldier with their boots ran up the stairs shouting, "Heraus, heraus, get out, get out." My mother and my father woke up, and of course I woke up crying. And they were told by the Dutch Nazi to dress myself and my brother boy, who was 4.5 years older than me, and pack a little bag. And my mother picked up, when she went into my room and my brother's room, we had the one room together, picked up a talcum powder can and then threw it on the floor threw it at the Dutch Nazi, and it bounced on the floor, and the powder came out. And he said to her, "What did you do that for? You made a mess." And she said, "The only mess here is you." And he hit her with the rifle. We were then pushed down the stairs. She was carrying me down the stairs. Outside there was a truck waiting, an army truck surrounded by Dutch police, and neighbors were looking on. And we were taken to the local train station, which was not far away. Then we were put in railway carriages, not cattle wagons, and taken to Westerbork. This is Westerbork. It was about, in those days, a 4 or 5 hour trip, and we arrived in the middle of the night, 28th, 29th. We were put in one of these huts, family all together, my father, my mother, my brother and I. And initially Westerbork, in the 1942s, when the Jews initially started to go there, they tried to make out it was just a camp where Jews were going to be held till the war finished, and then they were allowed to go back home. Well, they soon found out that that was sort of a fantasy. Every Monday night, late 42 it started, the Germans, with the help of the German Jewish, who were the refugees who were given, the German refugees were giving the job of looking after the Dutch Jews, or be their boss. They were sort of capos. And they made up a list of who was going to go where: Auschwitz, Bergen-Belsen, Sobibor, or Theresienstadt. So when our turn came on in January, the list came out that we were on the train to Bergen-Belsen, and my mother went to my father, said to my father, "Go and see the Germans, go and see the council, tell them we want to go to Auschwitz because that's where my sisters are." She found out, but they still weren't sure what Auschwitz was. So they knew it was a bad camp, but not that they were being gassed there. But of course, the Germans and the Dutch council, especially the Germans, more or less told my father to get lost, and we were sent to Bergen-Belsen, which was fortunate that they did this, because if we'd been sent to Auschwitz, I would be sitting here talking to you. So we went on the train to Bergen-Belsen on the 1st of February, and where we arrived on the 1st of February. My father, because he knew about horses, my father was in one camp, and this is that's the bunks we slept in. I just got past this. I'll just tell you that here, of the 58,380 Jews deported to Auschwitz, 854 survived. Of the 34,313 Jews, Dutch Jews I'm talking about, deported to Sobibor, 18 survived. Of the 3,751 Jews deported to Bergen-Belsen, 2,050 survived. So you can see how lucky, I don't believe in luck, but how fortunate we were to be sent to Bergen-Belsen. of the 4,894 Jews deported to Riesenstadt, 1,980 were murdered. So Bergen-Belsen was a fortunate way to be sent there. Now the reason what happened was the Germans decided that 30,000 Jews from Europe would be sent to Bergen-Belsen to be used as exchange prisoners for Germans that were captured in America, England, countries that were not occupied. That didn't work out. In the end, only 6,000 Jews were sent to Bergen-Belsen as exchange, and only 200 were ever exchanged. Now, Bergen-Belsen was made up of 4 major camps: a POW camp for Russian soldiers mainly, although Belgian and French soldiers went there later; exchange camp, which was subdivided into Star camp, where the 6,000 Jews were; a special camp for Polish Jews, Dutch Jews were; a neutral camp; and a Hungarian camp, Hungarian Jews. The Star camp was all Jewish. There was a men's camp, which were political prisoners and people like that, women's camp, and a tent camp. And, sorry. Okay, can't get the thing going again. I'll keep talking. We were put in 2 barracks. My father was put into 1 barrack, and my mother and my brother were put in another barrack. My father's job was he was given 2 horses and a cart, and his job was to pick up the dead bodies lying on the ground in Bergen-Belsen and in the barracks. My mother was given the job of cleaning the outside toilets. The toilets were outside of the barracks, and also working in the kitchen peeling potatoes. Now, question I'm asked by just about everybody: how come I survived and my family survived? We survived Bergen-Belsen as a family. My father, my mother, my brother, and I survived. When I started writing my book in 2001, and by the way, it took me 15 years to write the book because it was pretty heavy going. I did a lot of research. When I started writing the book, I learned a lot how we survived. My father working with horses was the major reason. The Germans fed horses better than they did the Jews. Horses got carrots, apples. The Jews got 2 slices of bread a day, a bit of water boiled in turnips, and sometimes a potato. As time went on, the feeding of Jews became less and less. And by you got to around about November 1944, there was hardly any food coming through the system. And it went to nothing. Now, what was happening was my father would take a carrot or a potato or an apple, and my brother would follow his cart and horse, and he would drop a carrot or potato along the way. My brother would pick it up and then would run to our barrack and would hide it till my mother got back from where she worked. And that was used mainly by my mother as an exchange for clothing for myself and my brother. We were growing kids, you know. Shoes weren't easy to get. There were no shops, obviously. My brother also, he was older, of course. By 1944, he was 9 years old, and he went running around the camp by himself. He would steal clothing from dead kids if he thought they fitted me or himself. My mother would use a potato here and a potato there to swap a potato for a jumper. And we were sort of in a position where we were helping people at the same time, because generally the jumper came from an kid that had grown out of it, or the kid had died. Although I believe nobody died in concentration camps, I believe they were all murdered. In Bergen-Belsen, between 50,000 and 60,000 people died. Nearly 50,000 of them were Jewish Jews. And as time went on and food became scarce, a disease called typhus came around, which is a deadly disease. And Bergen-Belsen was the camp furthest to the west, close away from the east, where by now in 1945, the Russians were coming from the east, the Americans came from the south and east, and the British came from the west. Now, it became pretty crowded. It was built for 10,000 people, and in the end, there were 60,000 people there. And because they were emptying Auschwitz, and all the trains from all the camps in the east came with prisoners to Bergen-Belsen. Many died on the train. You all heard the Anne Frank story. She came from Auschwitz with her sister. Her mother died in Auschwitz, or got murdered in Auschwitz. And she and her sister died of starvation and typhus. Typhus was a deadly disease. British soldiers, when they came in, were dying of typhus. The Germans stopped feeding the Jews, and it was every man for himself. They still kept on feeding the horses, or gave my father food for the horses, and for themselves, they had plenty of food. The British surrounded Bergen-Belsen and entered Bergen-Belsen on the 15th of April. We weren't in Bergen-Belsen. On the 9th, between the 6th and the 10th of April, the Germans decided to empty Star Camp so that the British would not find the Jews in there. And they put us on 3 trains. The first train was with Hungarian and some Dutch Jews that was liberated by the Americans 7 days after departure. They left there about the 7th of April. The second train was mainly Hungarians, and the destination on all 3 trains was Theresienstadt in Czechoslovakia, today the Czech Republic. And then from there on, we were supposed to be sent to the gas chambers. Auschwitz was already liberated, but there were sort of mobile gas chambers around the place. The second train made it to Theresienstadt, and nobody knows what happened we can only guess what happened to the people on board. The third train, which we were on, left on the night of the 9th, 10th. No food on board. This became known as the lost train. The reason for that is the train, nobody wanted to know the train, the German people that were running the railways, and the train was sort of going one way and then the next day going the other way, which direction. Eventually it ended up in Berlin on the 19th of April, and that's 10 days later. It stood there for 2 days because the German hierarchy had no idea where to go. It used to stop a lot wherever it went. My mother would jump off the train, so did other people, to steal food from the farms and bring a potato back here and there. And it was mainly the women that did that, because the men, especially my father, who was a big man, it'd be silly for him to jump off. Anyway, then doesn't matter, I'll keep going. We got another picture here. Can you see me?
Yes, we can, Eddie. Yeah, okay. We're listening.
Okay. So then we were sent down to the southeast to Poland by the train, this train. On the 23rd of April, the train was surrounded by the Russian army, and they told all the Jews to get off the train. They killed all the guards that were still there, and we marched to a little village called Trowitz. And the Russian, and I hate to say this today, but the Russians were, and I'm not saying this, everybody's saying this, who was there, you can read about it, but they're very good to the Jews. There were 2,400 on the train. 400 died on the train of starvation and typhus. 2,000 survived. The Russians put my family up in a school, and other people were put up in homes and other schools and hospitals. And the Russians put in a Jewish council. They were in charge. If there was a problem, the Russians would sort it out. But the Jews were told, you can steal what you want and eat what you want. And that's how we stayed in Trobits. I became sick with typhus. And typhus is a disease that if you survive it for 12 days, you survive forever. So I will live forever. I'm still here. We then were put on a truck to go to a place called Riza, to the east as well. The Russians were also dying of typhus. My father decided by now the war was just about finished and Holland was liberated. We're now sort of early May, mid-May, and my father decided to make his way back to Holland. He knew he had to go to the west. We left Riza. The Russians didn't care what we did. And he hitched a ride with the four of us hitched ride with Russian jeeps who took us to the river Elbe, where on the other side of Elbe was the city of Leipzig, which was occupied by the mainly Americans and the British. We were exchanged at the river Elbe, there was a bridge. The Americans had 4 gypsies and the Russians had 4 Jews, Dutch Jews. So we were exchanged for 4 gypsies. The Americans took us to school, put us up in a school. My brother went begging through Leipzig, for food and money. A British soldier came across him. My brother couldn't speak English. The British soldier couldn't speak Dutch, but somehow or other, my brother managed to get the British soldiers to come with him to the school where we were. My mother wasn't all that healthy. My father was a little bit sick. He straight away sent us to the British Field Hospital, where they gave us medication and we survived. And I'll rush it now. And the British soldier, Captain Douglas, his name was, put us on a train to Holland. We arrived in Holland on the 30th of June. We took a bus, or they put us on a bus to The Hague from the border. And we were taken to where we used to live, the house with the green door. We walked to there. My parents knocked on the door. Somebody came downstairs and my parents said, we live here. And the people said, no, wouldn't let us in. My mother then and my father then went to the Dutch police. They said, get lost. They went to the city of the Hague Council. They told us to get lost. They found a monastery where we could sleep for a while, and my father found a distant relative who was not Jewish, who put us up for a while. We were then allocated a flat which had no windows in it because of all the bombs and all this. And my parents started to make a living, recovered. In 1947, a little sister was born to me. In 1948, my father passed away through stress, through the army, through what he had to do in the camps. My mother was a widow with a 13-year-old, 8-year-old myself, and a 1-year-old sister. My parents, the only family they knew of was a sister of my grandmother on my father's side. They lived in Australia. And we were the #1 visa holders to come to Australia. Now, some of you may not know, but there were actually quotas on how many Jews could come into Australia in those days. And that's a fact. A lot of people don't believe that when I say that, but that's an actual fact. And we were at the boat we were supposed to go came too late for my father. My mother decided to stay a little bit longer. Eventually, we left Holland in 1954. We arrived here in March 1954. This auntie put us up for 2 days. I had a small flat in King's Cross. My mother and my brother found a flat at Coogee, in Brook Street, Coogee. The next day, my mother went down to the Coogee Bay Hotel, got a job as a cleaning lady. She organized for me to go to school. I went to school at South Sydney Junior Technical School at Maroubra Junction. I was 14 years old, couldn't speak English, made friends very quickly because they asked me to play rugby league because they could see that I could run. I became Australian very, very quickly. I left school at 15. I worked at radio station 2CH for 6 years as panel operator. I then started, a friend of mine said, "You're mad, you should go and earn some money." I then joined a typewriter company called Olivetti. And from then on, I just made my life in Australia. I don't have time to tell you the rest of the story. I've worked in America for 4 years through being sent there by my company, and I've done nicely for myself. I owe a lot to Australia. I'm a believer that the Holocaust should not be forgotten. That's why I took it upon myself to speak at schools and functions and wherever I could speak about the Holocaust. I try and keep it differently to everybody else. I try not to talk about gas chambers and Auschwitz. I talk about our story, how we survived. I did it in a rush. Normally it takes me about 45 to 50 minutes, but all I can do is, I think my time is up. Thank you very much for listening to me. I hope I didn't speak too fast for you, and I hope I didn't start speaking Dutch either. Sorry about the slides not working. That's okay. My fault. Thank you.
Eddie, thank you very much. No, you didn't speak too fast. It was very engaging. Just before we get to questions, I'll mention to everybody that if you're listening on J-Air, this is the Australian Jewish Association Zoom event, which we have every Wednesday night. Our guest tonight is Holocaust survivor Eddy Boas, who is telling us his story to mark Yom HaShoah, or Holocaust Remembrance Day, which is today. I'll just quickly hand over to David to make a couple of announcements and tell everybody what's coming up.
Okay, thank you very much, Alan. Firstly, I want to emphasise that we need you to support the association, and we ask you to do at least these three things. If you haven't yet applied for membership, please go to the website jewishassociation.org.au. You can apply online or make a donation. You can also join our email list from that page. And for daily updates, news and views, best thing is to follow us on Facebook. Now, we have a lot coming up in the next week, and I'm going to reveal tonight a bit of a coup. We have a special event this Monday with the new Ukrainian ambassador to Australia, Vasyl Miroshnichenko. I think this is the first time he will be addressing the Jewish community. So that's 8 o'clock on Monday, using the title Ukraine Under Attack. We'll also be asking him about certain issues facing the Jewish community and some of the activities that Israel has got involved in. Our next regular program event, apart from that special event, next Wednesday, we have the legendary Mordechai Kedar joining us. We'll be talking about some of the internal and external threats to Israel. And because of his expertise in Arabic and Islamic matters, one of the things that's emerged in the last few weeks, of course, is the relationship between Ramadan and violence. And being a totally non-PC topic, we're prepared to address it. And then also, I just want to let you know that there is a worldwide combat anti-Semitism movement Yom HaShoah event, because we're ahead in the time zones. It begins tomorrow from Australia to New York, and I have the privilege of being the Australian speaker in the whole program. So that's quite a lot, and certainly don't miss the event on Monday with the Ukrainian ambassador. It'll be a really special thing to join in. Thanks, Alan.
Thanks, David. Now we've got a few hands up. There's Ron, Jeff, Gary, and Robert's got some questions. Just before we do, Eddie, I've got a couple of questions. Firstly, I imagine you've told your story many, many times. How much is memory, and how much do you think is what you've picked up from all your research along the way?
None of it is memory. I was 3 years old when the camps came into it, to 5 years old. And the Dutch government sent me to psychiatrist. And everybody who knows me, the last person who needs a psychiatrist is me. And he agreed that I've blocked everything out of my mind. And I live my life, I don't think back. I live for today. I've taught my two sons this. I don't know what happened yesterday. There's nothing I can do about that anymore. Certainly what happened 75 years ago, there's nothing I can do about. So my knowledge comes from my mother. She passed away in 2001. She never spoke about the Holocaust till she was interviewed by the show of Spielberg. And the only way she would do it is me sitting next to her. She helped me a lot. My brother, who suffered badly from all he had to do, when he was 5 to 10 years old, all he was told to do is to steal this and steal that. And he got into a lot of trouble. And he had nightmares. And I was fortunate that with my job that I had in America, that I was also responsible for Holland as a country. So I saw my brother quite a lot, and he told me quite a lot, and he had a lot of documents and things like that. The research I took, as I said, it took me 15 years. I would write to a Dutch department and they wouldn't answer. My parents tried to get that money back I mentioned before, the $400,000. I still don't know where it is. The apartment building that we lived in, I can't find out who owned that. The Dutch, whatever you might hear about the place, and unfortunately the Anne Frank diary makes out that the Dutch were very good as well, which is a myth, and it's coming out now quite a bit. The Dutch brought in a pension system, took them to 1974. I have never had 1 cent compensation from the Dutch. My mother did and my brother did. I never had. I don't need it anymore, so don't worry about it.
Yeah. Can I just ask you about the time in the camps? And I imagine you'll be relying on what you've heard. It must have been an absolutely dreadful existence. I'm just wondering, were the Jews united? Did they work together, or did it get to the point where they started turning on each other because life was so desperate?
My mother, who obviously remembered everything, she had a terrible life, to be very honest with you. She never talked about that. Because I was young, she would give an elderly lady who didn't have to go to work an apple or a potato, whatever it may be, to look after me. And she never said there was any arguments with anybody at all. I think, you know, human nature is such that as you become desperate, you know, things just don't the same. And when people were dying, just lying on the ground there, it was terrible.
Yeah. Okay, we'll go to questions. I've got Ron and then Jeff, and then we'll take something from Robert. So Ron, please unmute yourself and fire away.
Hello, goedenavond.
Goedenavond.
Thank you for a very interesting and moving talk. It's also very similar to my own mother in Amsterdam. But I wanted to ask you, what is your opinion about the Dutch royal family who kept a distance from their Jewish subjects and did almost nothing to support them? Also with the NSB'ers, nothing. What is your opinion?
Okay, I wrote a bit about that in my book and didn't tell it tonight, but I usually bring that in. The Dutch are the only country that up to 2020 had never apologized for what happened to the Jews in Holland. That includes the royal family. And they were the only Western country in Europe who never apologized. I took it upon myself to make that one of my goals, and I achieved the goal. I'll come back to that in a second. The royal family, Queen Wilhelmina, was based in London. And I'll give you an example. She only mentioned in all the years that she was there, which was 5 years, she mentioned the Jews once in her daily speeches. That's the only time she mentioned Jews, when she said something about a certain section of the population was being treated bad. The Dutch resistance asked for permission to blow up the railway lines to Westerbork, the transit camp in Holland, and she refused. The Dutch royal family never apologized till 2020, and it happened to be on the 26th of January as well. And I quickly tell you the story, how that came about. I through connections, where I met somebody who was a personal friend of the Prime Minister of Holland, today's Prime Minister. This was in 2017. He said to me, write a letter and I will help you write it. And we wrote a letter. He lives in London. He was a top financial person in Europe, a government person, not Dutch government, another government. I won't mention because I don't want to mention the name. And he handed a letter to Prime Minister in January 2018. Now, I'd written to a Dutch Prime Minister in 2009 and saying, why hasn't Holland apologized? And he came back and saying, well, I'm sorry what happened to you, blah, blah, blah. And we could have and we should have done better. Okay? Every Dutch government person I wrote to said exactly the same thing. We could have and we should have. The Queen of Holland, Beatrix, was in the Israeli Knesset, coming Medina now, and she said exactly the same thing. So this Prime Minister, Mr. Rudd, got this letter from my friend, and he wrote me a note back saying more or less exactly the same thing. And he mentioned the names, thanks for getting the letter through, what you know, we should have and could have done so. Never heard anything again. On the 26th of January 2020, what, 2 years ago, on my birthday, my 80th birthday, the Dutch Prime Minister and the Dutch King on publicly on Dam Square in Amsterdam, in front of television, apologized to the Dutch Jewish community.
Yeah. Eddie, is there much of a Holocaust education program in Holland?
Not that I know of. I don't think the Dutch would be interested, to be honest with you. Look, why did so many Jews die in Holland and you know, 90% or something, more than that? It's the Dutch are the Dutch. Now, I don't dislike the Dutch. I follow their football team. I follow their sports people. I go to Holland. But during the war and immediately after the war, the government there was pretty well inundated with quite a lot of Nazis, Dutch Nazis. And there's quite a few movies about that. So I don't doubt very much if there's a Holocaust education there.
Okay. Jeff, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Shalom, Eddie. Bis 120, as I say, referring to you living for at least that long, I want to ask you whether you think, like Anna Frank, that the world is basically populated by good people, or actually the actual quote is people are basically good. Do you share that opinion? Somehow, I think you've seen too much to share that opinion from the great Anna Frank.
Well, I'm not sure what her opinion was. What did you say it was, sorry?
It was that the world is basically filled with good people. So it's quite an optimistic view of the world.
Okay, all right.
In view of everything that happened.
I can answer that. And I feel exactly the same thing. I tell everybody who has a whinge about something, the world, and I've met many people in my life. I'm 82 years old, and I was fortunate to have a decent job where I met prime ministers and leading politicians and people like that. And I've sat on airplanes next to thousands of people. The majority of people that I've met in my life are decent people. I learned in life from my parents, the ones that are not decent, don't bother with them. And I believe I'm a pretty decent, I'm a good judge of character. And if I decide that this person I don't want to know, I don't want to know them. And I agree with Anne Frank there. That
and that's interesting. because your parents obviously instilled that into you, which must have been, I can't imagine how hard that would have been living the way they were living.
Well, my father died in 48, so,
At what age?
He was 42, but 1948, not in 1948, he was 42 years old. My mother was a very strong-minded woman, and she taught this to me. She learned in life, and she showed me sometimes when we went somewhere and somebody answered her and she knew straight away, let's go. She wouldn't argue with people about things because it's a fact. I certainly believe that.
Yes. Robert, have you got some questions that you want to ask?
Yeah, we've got a few questions. So thank you very much, Eddy. Very, very important talk, and just finished reading your book. So
we can't, Robert, just hold it up again, but a bit further away from the screen because it's a bit hard to see with the background. No, we're not seeing it.
Not working, but just a few questions, Eddy. So what happened to the Dutch Nazi collaborators? Were they punished? What ended up happening?
Well, they were all, the ones they caught, were sent to jail, but none of them served their sentence to the end. And the same with the Germans who were in charge. And it's a long story now, but my brother got in trouble with the police, ended up in jail with a group called the Breda Four, which were the 4 worst Nazis, and they had cells next to him. They didn't serve their full sentence either, and they murdered nearly every Jew in Holland. They were responsible for it. So that's what happened to them. They just went to jail for a few years, and by 1970-something, they were all out of jail.
And someone's asked if you could just expand on the idea of the exchanges, the Jews that were going to be saved for exchanges overseas.
Yeah. Well, the idea was that if they picked on Jews, apparently, and I don't know how we got there, who had families, let's say in America, that were influential, or in England or in Canada, and then they wanted to swap these Jews with the Germans that were captured in these countries for spying or whatever it might be. Only 220 actual exchange was made from Bergen-Belsen. There were nearly 6,500 of us out of the 30,000. It just didn't work.
Okay. Someone's asked, what's your view of Geert Wilders? And I might add to that of anti-Semitism in Holland today and the situation there.
I honestly don't know much about, I read about him. I don't know much about him, to be honest with you. I'm not a political person, and certainly I have no interest in the Dutch political situation. Sorry about that.
Okay. All right, we've got Saul. Please unmute yourself, Saul.
What I want to ask is something that is absolutely amazing. The King of the Netherlands, Willem-Alexander Koning, the Nederlanden, Prince van Oranje-Nassau, his father, the husband of Queen Beatrix, was Prince Claus de Nederlanden. Prince Claus de Nederlanden, if you look at Gini, and if Gini is accurate, not very many ancestors back, not many generations back at all, you will find rabbis, Rabbi Simon Samson Oppenheimer, Feigele Oppenheimer, Rabbi Moses Samson, Bacharach, etc. So Willem-Alexander actually is related to Jews.
I didn't know that.
On that topic, Eddy, are you able to go back and see how far back your ancestry goes? Are there records, and how far back can you go?
I go back to 1700. What happened was, talking about the Boas family, Boas is a Portuguese name. And during the Inquisition in the 1400s, as the Jews had to leave Portugal and Spain, they mostly went north to Poland. And then my side of the family, and I can lean back and show you, my side of the family entered Holland around about early 1700s. And the first chief rabbi of the Netherlands was named Boas, who came from Poland. Whether he was related to me, I'm not sure, but that's as far back I go with my friend.
Right. Okay. All right, Gary, you've got your hand up. Please unmute yourself. No, you're still muted, Gary. Gary, I can see you talking, but you need to unmute yourself. That's it.
Eddie, thank you. Thank you for carrying the memory of the Holocaust to so many people. Alan, your question about the genealogy side, just like to point out the Australian Jewish Genealogical Society in Sydney has a really comprehensive set of transcriptions of Dutch Jewish records going back a few centuries.
Yes, yes, and they're active also in Melbourne. So if people are interested in genealogy, that's a good place to go. Thanks, Gary. Now I see some hands going up and down. If anybody,
I'll just show you. Can you see this at all?
yes,
Yeah, we can, but can't read
Okay,
it.
that's the family tree that my brother had done in England for the whole family, going right back to 1720 something. Yeah.
Eddie, I can see we're getting close to time,
Yeah.
but I don't want to let you go before asking you to say something about the project that you've got in the pipeline and the one that you've asked AJA to assist with.
And I appreciate you doing that. I'm organising a live interview in August. We hope to have it, and I think it's actually been confirmed today, at the New South Wales Parliament House in their theatre. I like 100 people to be there. It'll be a live interview by Caroline Marcus, who is a presenter at Sky Australia, Sky News. It'd be professional film director to make it. It'd be an hour and a half at night filming with questions, and then it will be reduced to a 45, 50-minute, I'll call it a video, but nowadays you call it a USB stick. And the idea is that I have sent it to every school or send it to government education departments. I won't charge anybody anything. I'm financing the whole thing myself, and send it to museums around the world at no charge. So there'd be basically, it'd be in a more relaxed way than it was tonight, and a bit more time allowed, so that we can then narrow it down to 45, and that's about all the attention most people have for things like this. But we'll go right back through the more detail what I talked about today. And Caroline has read my book, and she actually knew more, read it in depth, and already had questions when I met her. So I'm looking forward to that.
thanks, Eddie. Look, we're virtually at time, but Sandy, if you're very quick, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I mean, we very seldom hear of children surviving, and I just am fascinated with that. And how did you feel? Were there other children to play with and so on? So that just seems to me a very interesting challenge. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, Eddie, what was it like as a small child living the life that you lived?
I had no friends. You got to remember, I never slept in a bed. I never ate vegetables. I never drank milk till I was about 6 years old. And when I got out of the camp where we lived, there were obviously young boys there as well. I didn't make any friends till I came to Australia, till I went to school here. Prior to that in Holland, I don't remember a lot about all that, even in those days. But I had no friends. I never had any aunties, never had any uncles, never had any nephews, cousins. You know, so there was just the four of us when we were in Australia. My mother, my brother, and myself.
Yeah, what a very tough life. Look, we will have to leave it there. And Eddie, it's understandable how, despite the unspeakable atrocities that the Holocaust survivors witnessed and lived through, many couldn't bring themselves to speak about it. So to those such as you, full credit for having whatever quality it takes to relive your experiences over and over again. It's wonderful. History's obviously recorded the facts, but I think you can take comfort in knowing that it will also record the testimonies of people such as you on days like this. So we want to thank you for joining us on this Yom HaShoah. It's a powerful story and you tell it very well. So thank you so much for doing so and for continuing to do so. And may you do that for a long time to come.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you all for attending tonight. I hope to see you at some other functions. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So just before we go, the L'chaim program with Morris Klein is on right now. He's also doing a Yom HaShoah program. That's 3ZZZ FM 92.3 or 3ZZZ.com.au. That's all we have for tonight. Don't forget the Ukrainian ambassador is on Monday night, and Mordechai Kadar is on Wednesday night. You can also keep up to date with what the AJA is talking about by looking at our Facebook page. So please like it and share it widely. But for now, we wish you all a very good evening and look forward to seeing you next Monday and then next Wednesday as usual. So from me, it's good night to you all. Bye for now.